today we're looking at the disaster management cycle, right? So remember we talked about the difference between events, hazards, and disaster. What is an event again? Everybody can speak at the same time? Okay, that's an example. Right? It is an occurrence, right, that happens naturally in our environment that can potentially lead to a threat, which is then referred to the hazard, right? And what is the disaster? Right, so it is when a country resources, right, cannot withstand that hazard in terms of damage and property. So reading, what is a hazard and what is a disaster? Hazard?
A hazard is a phenomenon caused by natural or human forces which endanger a group of people, their belongings and their environment, when they have not taken precautions. For example, if you live near a volcano, the eruptions are a hazard even though they may not occur for many years.
You all understand that? So this first part of it where they said a phenomena caused by natural or human forces, that is the event. That is the event. Everybody understand that? And remember I was distinguishing that hazards can be both natural or it can be man-made. Right? So remember we're talking about like chemical explosions, right? Fires that happen when man smoke or they throw a cigarette in an area that is very dry. Those things are all man-made hazards that where fires get out of control. A disaster on the other hand is what?
A disaster is the result of a hazard that has struck the community. The effects depend on how vulnerable the community is to a particular hazard, or its own inability to withstand it or to respond to it.
Right? So the important part underneath here is what? The inability to. Right, so being prepared and mitigating for that hazard is very important, and that will depend on how you are able to cope with the threats posed by the hazard. Do you all understand that? So different communities have different levels of what we call vulnerabilities. Do you all understand that? For example, remember last day we were talking about marginal areas. So communities that are built in marginal areas, meaning on steep slopes, like the Lady Young, you all realize what happens along the Lady Young when there's a heavy downpour of rain, intense rain. I don't know if you all realize that many of those houses around the Lady Young, along the road, are literally holding on by the grace of Jesus. Right? No, you could see underneath is actually collapsing. You all never noticed that? To the point now they are actually putting up some gabion terracing steps there to help with the landslide. So those people are in vulnerable communities. A community which is built on a flat land and have proper drainage, their vulnerability is going to be less. You all understand that? Yes. So vulnerabilities differ, and they also differ in terms of the amount of disaster or damage that will take place. I shouldn't say the disaster, but damage. Greater vulnerability to not just hurricanes, but tsunamis, storm surges, because a storm surge, a very large storm surge from thunderstorms or tropical depression can cause erosion and destruction. And you all remember in Manzanilla, when they have that erosion of the entire road collapsing, So rural areas that have less resources as well is going to be more vulnerable. Do you all understand that? So your vulnerability differs based on your location and the resources that you have to cope with that vulnerability. Everybody is following me? So remember, I was talking about less developed countries and more developed countries, and why countries like Japan, although they are experiencing earthquakes quite often, their vulnerability to that hazard destructing or causing devastation in that country is lower, as opposed to Jamaica, where we see the infrastructural damage was quite a lot, even at the University of the West Indies. Of course, Japan is, it's like clockwork. Everybody know how to respond. So with that being said, when we look at disaster management cycle, we have to look at it at different levels. You all understand that? So natural disasters is a very complex, natural hazards and disasters is a very complex system. So we look at it at the individual and community level, how you can respond as individuals, but you are also part of a community. What are some of the communities you can think of that you are part of? Besides your home where you live, that community, your next community is your schools. Your community is your school. You all understand that? And within your school, you also then have your other community, which is your form class, and how they would respond. So a form teacher that is more prepared for the earthquake, like Mr. Thomas, who will say, store our water, make sure the girls have change of clothing, that class will be more prepared. You all understand? So remember yesterday I gave you all an idea of how to respond. So if you all are constantly taking that into account, when it happens, you all will be a little more prepared. Do you all understand that? So if you look in your textbook, the the chapters that covers hazard is quite extensive. It's very long because you have several case studies. So that is why I broke you all up into the groups this morning. So you would see it ends on page 189 and it starts on what page? 158. Of course, if we do the case studies in groups in terms of disaster preparedness and how they respond, that is why I have you all in groups. So we want to have a dramatic presentation in class next week, right? With a disaster preparedness plan. So I'm going to give you all of the details. So at the individual level, our disaster management cycle and things that we need to take into account in terms of preparedness, right? Preparedness is what? To prepare for managing the hazard. So we want to prepare for managing the hazard at all times. Do you all understand that? So that is what we refer to as early warning. Remember I told you all about early warning yesterday? What are early warning systems? Right? So you want to have your locations of emergency shelters available to you at home. Let me see by the number of hands here. Do you all know where your shelters are?
No.
The nearest one located to you, do you know where it is?
Yes.
Okay, so if you don't know, yes, it might be a school, right? You have to go, listen, go to the ODPM website, or you can go to the first responders website. Those sites you will see, they give you, and it happens a lot during flooding. They're going to send out what is the nearest shelter you can go to. Because you all know our most prominent threat in Trinidad and Tobago is flood. 5 minutes, 10 minutes of heavy, intense rainfall, and it is the ocean here. We could sail a boat through communities, which is true. There were times, I don't know if you all recall that community in the east. Oh gosh, I can't remember. Something, Not Orkun. Orkun floods too, but there's another one in the east where it was very, very bad, right? People were using little boats to help. Like water was so full, right? I will get the name. I can't remember. Right? Yeah. So you also need to know those shelters, and they would give you the list of shelters. You all understand that?